Number 1. Personal experience. So, okay, I've shared some personal stories before, and I think most people understand my viewpoint on the paranormal. I don't take a hard-line stance that the paranormal as a whole either exists or does not exist, and I think most people understand my viewpoint. I do, however, judge everything I can on an individual case-by-case basis. With me having epilepsy, hearing and seeing something can be chalked up to partial seizures. Normally, I can have an auditory hallucination, but visual is not out of the question. I had a very odd experience a few nights ago. All I'm going to do is explain what happened, and I'm going to let everyone listening come up with their own conclusions. I was up late last night doing some work on this very video, but also keep in mind that I tend to sleep a non-conventional schedule to begin with. You also know that we have many cats, 7 of them at the moment. Only a couple of the cats ever come into my room, and normally none of them sleep in here. That's just because it's difficult for me to sleep when I think I might have to wake up for some reason. Napping is not an easy thing for me because of this, but if I go to bed and I am thinking that a cat is in my room, and that it might need to wake me up at some point in order to be out of that room, I will always sleep with my door closed. Well, anyway, my sister, mom, and I ran some errands. One of them I will tell you about later, but one of them was a trip to the laundromat. I always enjoy laundry day, because nothing feels better than laundry, fresh pajamas, and bed linens. But I was doing work, so I wasn't able to get to sleep until really late that night. I sleep on my side, and it normally takes me a while to fall asleep. So I curled up on my bed and I laid down on my pillow, ready to sleep. Maybe less than a minute after laying down, I experienced something very strange. I felt a cat jump on my bed. I have a desk next to my bed that is higher than the bed itself, so it felt as if the cat jumped down from the desk, landed on my bed and part of my leg. This caused the bed to shake and for me to jump upright in bed. Of course, my very first thought was that one of the house cats got into my room, so I called out for the ones that answered to their names. There was no response. Then I had to get up and look around, and I searched the entire bedroom. There were no animals in my room at all. I searched in every possible place that one might have tried and hid, but I was unable to find anything. There was no animal of any kind in my room. So I went back to bed, but I was unnerved. I couldn't explain what had happened. If it was a hallucination, it was not like my normal hallucinations. There was some noise, but mainly I felt a cat jump on me, and it shook my bed a little when it happened. And yes, I darted straight up when I felt it, and I had assumed the cat had run off. But if this happened, there is no way the cat could have got out of my room. As I was laying down, I remembered something. As everyone knows, we had to put down our cat Althea earlier this month. She was cremated, but that process seemed to take a long time for some reason. We weren't able to pick up the ashes until that day that we were at the laundromat, when we were running our errands. So that night was the very first time those ashes had been in our house since we had to take Althea to the vet. So, whenever I shared my experiences like this, I don't tell you what to think of them. Personally, I don't think it was supernatural. After I had my brother's ashes in my room, I often felt someone pressing their foot down on the foot of my bed. Anybody who follows my channel a lot might remember I mentioned this before. This was something that my brother usually did. I think my mind very likely created the sensation to comfort itself after the losses. But I also won't tell anyone what to think. It did scare me quite a bit when it happened. Number 2. My father has held the position of the manager in various tea gardens across Darjeeling in India. With this responsibility, our family has had the chance to stay in some amazing British-made bungalows scattered around the hill station. A little background to the ones who are not familiar with this concept. India was under the British rule for many years, and since most of the country's temperatures rose to 45 degrees Celsius in the summers, the English decided to settle within the tea plantations. One of those areas is Darjeeling, with a climate similar to that of the UK. They built beautiful bungalows, and they still house the managers who are responsible for the well-being of the tea gardens, like my father. So now to my story. One of the bungalows where we lived was in a place called Cedars, on the outskirts of Darjeeling, which was separated from the small village situated nearby. We lived there for almost 16 years, and boy do I have stories. Generally, every household helper that was provided to us by the company that my father worked for warned my mother about the various happenings that would occur within the place. My mother usually brushed them off, but as it would get boring, would indulge in some stories from time to time. That was until she had a tale of her own. My mother has always been a light sleeper. One night when we were all asleep, I nestled between my parents as I was only 3. She jolted awake for no reason. She lied down with her eyes closed in the dark and waited for sleep to come. However, she started to hear light footsteps in the room. The floors were wooden, so the sounds were pretty obvious, and she also realized that they were light, as it sounded similar to my footsteps as I was small. Her first thought was that I was not in bed and was running around. However, when she tried to feel for me, there I was, sound asleep. Now she was alert. Gradually, the footsteps were joined by another set. Now, there were 2 distinct sounds of footsteps running to and fro. My mother started sweating and was so fear-stricken that she couldn't even wake us up. The second one was as light as the first, and just when she thought that it couldn't get worse, the door to the room slammed open. Sweating bullets, she tried to hear any sound, but now the room was completely silent. She didn't move and eventually fell asleep. This was just the beginning. The servants continued to complain about furniture being moved when we were away, and voices, mostly similar to my mother's, calling out to them from the rooms when she would be outside in the lawn. As I grew up, I would occasionally hear footsteps when there was no one around in that room. I got my room and didn't experience anything until I was in my teen years. I shifted schools and had to stay with my aunt in the main town of Darjeeling. I would come back for the weekends and would sleep in my room. One night, as I was texting my then boyfriend on my sad flip phone, I heard knocking on my window. I lifted the curtains to see nothing but pitch darkness. I brushed it aside. I brushed it off as some insect crashing on the glass and went to sleep. However, every weekend would be the same, and I would always ignore it. This didn't sit well with the thing, as the water in my bathroom would turn on its own. Most nights, I would wake up to the sound of running water. I did nothing about it because I was a teenager. As time passed by, my mother started to notice a pattern in the incidents she had with the deaths taking place in the village. Every time someone would die in the village, there were whispers, indiscernible words being repeated over and over by unknown voices in different rooms, and weird orbs of light floating in the dark. This all came to a head when my younger brother saw something in the living room one night. He was only 2, just learning to talk, and could not finish his sentences properly. Usually, he would sit by my father in the study, trying to draw and help my father with his work. One weekend as I was home, I sat with my mother watching television in her room, while my brother and father were in the study. The living room was dark and shared a door with the study. My brother was facing the door, and according to my father, he started screaming and crying hysterically pointing towards the dark room and babbling incoherent words. As he was inconsolable, my father called for my mother and me. After calming down a bit, all he could say was, "Eyes. Scary eyes." Well, needless to say, I slept with the lights on that night. One chilling incident occurred when we had to attend a wedding in a different state. There were night guards who always stayed in too. However, one night, one of the guards was unwell. So the only guard made his rounds. He saw or heard nothing unusual. He settled down after a while and began to nod off in his cabin. Suddenly, he felt a cold arm on his back, and he jolted awake. He was spooked, but thought he was just imagining things in his sleepy state. After making another round, he settled back in his cabin. This time he was wide awake and reading the newspaper when he felt the cold arm on his side. And that was it. He ran without looking back and returned only the next morning with several of the villagers in tow. The last major incident was when it was just my father and me, as my mother and brother were out of town. I had recently adopted my adorable dog, Muffin, and he was just 2 months old. He usually slept by the foot of my bed, and this night was no different. I was on my phone, and Muffin was fast asleep, when he shot straight up and started growling at the bathroom door, which I had left open. I tried to calm him down, but he started barking. I nearly shat myself, but eventually managed to calm him down. This night, too, I fell asleep with the lights on in my room. I had a dreamless sleep. However, in my sleep, I heard a melodious voice of a lady say, "Wake up, honey," in a caring tone. You should understand that while India has the second highest English-speaking population, it was unlikely for the surrounding village to have someone speak the language so clearly. I was suddenly awake, and as I opened my eyes, I saw nothing. It was pitch dark. The lights had cut out, and I couldn't see a thing. I started panicking, as I am scared of complete darkness. I felt for Muffin, but couldn't find him. I started fumbling for my flashlight, and when I found it, I ran to my father's room. This was the last incident in that house, before we had to move. I don't know what was in that place, but I know that soft voice wanted nothing but the best for me. Number 3. Shiloh and the Shadow of Sound. Killer Orange Cat, I know you're skeptical of paranormal stories, but this one is true. My family is from the South. We lived in Memphis, Tennessee, until I was 11, and then moved to Missouri. Shortly thereafter, and because my dad was such an asshole, my parents got divorced. After that, we moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. Since my mother was now a single parent, and because she had family in Little Rock, we moved there with me and my 5 other sisters. Our only brother stayed in Memphis, Tennessee. To make a long story short, my uncle, who was my mother's brother, had 60 acres of land, and he invited my mother, me, and my sisters to put a trailer on his land. He set up the electricity, water, sewage, etc., all by himself. After we moved there, one of my sisters was given a Siamese cat. One day, she had kittens under the trailer. I followed her and noticed the hole in the fiberglass lining she had them in. Because of the fiberglass, I knew that I had to get the kittens and bring them inside as soon as possible. The first one I took was this tiny little life, a runt. She was a multicolored chocolate tortoise shell. It was then and there that I decided she would be mine. I named her Shiloh. Despite being the runt, Shiloh had the heart of a lion. She was a fierce little thing. Once she fought off a stray Doberman pinscher that was trying to get to her first litter. Between Shiloh's claws and my yelling, the dog bolted, and Shiloh dropped off, continuing to run after it until it was good and gone. When she came back after that ordeal, she was covered in blood, but thank God, none of it was hers. Shiloh loved to be outside. She absolutely craved it, and would stop at nothing to go out and get out whenever she could. My uncle raised pigs and chickens and had a huge garden. Shortly after moving there, he gave me a large chicken enclosure made of chicken wire with a wooden frame and no bottom that protected his starter chicks until a chicken coop was finished. Since they were all grown up now, he didn't need it anymore. Because Shiloh turned out to be the hairy Houdini of cats, she eventually found the weakest part of the wire. She'd wedged herself halfway out when she saw me coming back with her food and water. I yelled, "Shiloh!" and she stopped momentarily, her huge golden orbs gleaming in the sunlight, scowling as though to say, "Catch me if you can," and tore herself the rest of the way out and down the road. During the winter, the old dirt road was a lot of fun, because we used to sled down it from my uncle's place, and it was a really long hill. But this time, it was a terror, because Shiloh was out, and I was desperately trying to get her back before she reached the woods. My uncle's property had this long dirt road that led up a hill where his house sat overlooking the acreage and our trailer below. On both sides of the road were trees that were very dense and thick. If you looked into the woods, you couldn't see beyond the first few trees. They were so close together, they had the effect of a kind of fence. You would really have to work your way to get through them. As a 15-year-old, I was unnaturally long-legged and fast on my feet. Friends at school used to call me Bambi. I could outrun nearly everyone. My teachers would later recommend that I join the track team, so when I saw her moving down the road, getting smaller and smaller, outdistancing me, my worst fear was of her suddenly diving deep into the dreaded woods, and that was exactly what she did. Meanwhile, here I am racing to catch up, thinking I don't know how I'm going to get into the woods because of the thickness of the briars and brambles, and they're really hard to get through. Nonetheless, and because I loved her so much, I was willing to go through heaven and hell to get her back. When I entered the woods, I had to blaze my way through the dense foliage with all the burrs, barbs, and stickers. Suddenly, I completely lost sight of Shiloh. As I moved in, going around and through the impossibly close trees, visibility is down to just a few feet, and because of this, there is nearly no sunlight reaching the floor of the woods. It's almost completely black underfoot, and all around. Strangely, the woods on this side of the road showed absolutely no signs of wildlife, neither scat nor spoor. Also, there were no signs of squirrels, rabbits, or bird nests. It was as though all the wildlife in the area avoided the wood on this side of the road, while favoring the wood on the other. Shiloh, with all her lion's heart, proved to be the exception. It was then that I first heard the noise. I wanted it to be Shiloh. I told myself it had to be her. When I peered around a tree from where I thought the sound was coming, I still couldn't see anything. My heart dropped. I desperately needed it to be her. Then, as I started looking for her again, peering around another tree, the sound stopped. When I still didn't see Shiloh, I called out to her. No response. Anybody that had been owned by a cat knows that cats won't listen unless they want to. She obviously didn't want to. I started looking again, straining to see through the gloom, when my heart started beating so loud, I swore whatever it was could hear it. It sounded like there was something, or someone moving, but this time really fast toward me. Instinctively, I stepped back and reached around behind me, feeling to avoid colliding with the tree. To me, it sounded like a person. From a young age, my mother taught me to be afraid of nothing. And because I've lived in and around woods all my life, the second sound wasn't particularly alarming, although it sounded like something bigger. The first seemed softer, further away, like something smaller. Like a small animal. But because I knew there were no animals on this side of the road, it had to be Shiloh. But when I realized that both sounds were coming from the same source, but now much louder, I felt it to be more menacing. The sound it made seemed like it wasn't having to avoid the trees. I imagined it was sweeping through them, not around or over them. Then it abruptly stopped again. My heart was beating out of my chest. I felt as though I was going to have a heart attack. But still thinking of Shiloh, I called one more time. Nothing. It was then that I decided to back out of the woods. Thinking that it was going to run into me, I tripped and fell flat on my ass. Half laughing, I got back on my feet and resumed backing away. Although I couldn't see it, I was not able to turn my back on it. It seemed to stay in the woods as though the road was an invisible barrier. Momentarily, I was distracted by something out of the corner of my left eye. It was Shiloh. She was only a few feet from me. She kept looking around towards the sound and back at me. Her pupils were huge, and the heart of the lion seemed to have left her. She was really scared. For the first time in my life, I was too. Before I know it, she's in my arms. I don't know how, but I got what I came for, and now I'm moving in a fast walk. As I'm moving, picking up speed, the sound is moving with us, mimicking us, but always limited by the barrier of the wood. It won't or can't enter onto the road. I stopped momentarily to see if I could see it. The sound stopped as well. It was like a dog behind a fence, keeping pace with me every step of the way. I hoped it wouldn't follow me there. I started moving at a quicker pace, the sound moving with us as though it were part of us. Though I am terrified beyond comprehension, I keep trying to see what is pursuing us. Call it morbid curiosity. I tried testing it to gauge its response. As I sped up, it sped up. As I stopped, it stopped. As I go on, it goes on. Later, I would liken it to my shadow. Not a shadow of sight, but a shadow of sound. Again, as I speed up, the sound speeds up. So I started running as fast as I could, and the sound is running right alongside me, but always in the wood and not on the road. I still can't see what's making the sound, but I'm thinking this is impossible. Nothing could move as fast as I'm moving without hitting the trees. It sounds like it's breaking twigs and bark as it goes, but the trees aren't moving. There are no leaves rustling or falling as it moves. It's as though the speed of the sound is not affected by any obstacle in its path, except for the road or when I stop or start. As I clutched Shiloh for dear life, she kept straining to look, her eyes huge with fear. When I turned off the road to cut across the clearing, away from the road, the sound stopped. Suddenly feeling watched, I ran onto the trailer. I thanked God it couldn't follow me the rest of the way home. Sometime later, I noticed claw marks and blood on my shirt and my chest, where Shiloh had been gouging me, but I felt absolutely none of it at the time when Shiloh and I were making our way out. I proved my love and devotion to her that day, and many times more through the coming years, and she proved her love and devotion for me when, though she was the cause of us entering the woods in the first place, she was also the cause that got us out. Shiloh knew that if she did not return to me when she did, I would go on searching no matter what. I would not stop until I found her. I can only imagine what might have become of us. Over the years I have thought on this incident many times, and have come to the conclusion that, whatever made the sound, it wasn't actually threatening us, more like it was escorting us. It never tried to hurt me or Shiloh. Rather, the sound seemed to be telling us to get out of the woods. I think it may very well have been protecting us. From what, we never knew. Strangely, whatever the hell it was, and as long as I lived there, I never walked down that section of road again. And stranger still, Shiloh never went into the woods on that side of the road either. All we knew is that whatever it was in the woods scared the living hell out of us. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.